Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is exploring the Episcopal experience. And each year I teach this class as a couple of things. One, it has, let me put this on because it helps me not have to scream. And also it helps the people online just hear a little better as well. So each year I teach this class as for a couple of reasons. One, for at one level, it's really a powerful time for individuals who are new to the Episcopal Church in some way. It seems also to serve in a wonderful way for folks who've been in the Episcopal Church maybe a good long while and usually come away saying to me, wow, I didn't know that, or I learned something new from this time together. And then it also is a wonderful way for folks who are just new to Trinity to get to know some other folks and other folks who are just coming into Trinity as well. So we usually end up having in the room folks who have been Episcopalians their whole lives and are enjoying learning something new, and maybe been at Trinity for a very long time. Folks who are brand new to Trinity, brand new to the Episcopal Church, maybe been in the Episcopal Church a good long while, and so on and so forth. So it's a really great time. I love this class in so many ways. We're going to do a number of things in this class. We're going to look at history. We're going to look at theology. We're going to look at liturgy. We're going to look at practice. And we're going to look at Trinity Church, a little bit more about Trinity Church and the history and place of Trinity. Feel free to come on in, grab a chair, just pull it up closer. There's some chairs over here. You're not late at all. No, you're not late at all. Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely. And so thank you, lady. It ends up serving many different individuals' interests and needs and hopes and dreams, so to say. So I don't know where any of you fit in that. Well, I know where some of you fit in that, but just welcome. I've met most of you at some level, but nevertheless, I'm Scott and I am the rector here at Trinity Church, and we can start right there with that word, rector. There is a kind of unique word to Episcopalian life. Rector is just a word used in the Church of England that designates the head clergy person of a certain geographical area or a church. And it means something a little different here in the United States than it does in England. Ends up because it just means the head senior pastor of a congregation. That's what it means. So that's the word that we use in the Episcopal Church for the senior pastor of a congregation, rector. There's a number of other terms we will use, and that's another thing we will accomplish in this group is talking about. Please come on in. Come on in. There's more chairs over here. All right. So if you would pick up the book in front of you or on your chair and turn with me to page 818. Page 818.
Scott, are y'all in the Bible or is that a Book of Common Prayer?
In the prayer book. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Page 818. I'm going to lead the prayer for the unity of the church. Let us pray. O God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, our only Savior, the Prince of Peace, give us grace seriously to lay to heart the great dangers we are in by our unhappy divisions. Take away all hatred and prejudice and whatever else may hinder us from godly union and concord, that as there is but one body and one spirit, one hope of our calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, so we may be all of one heart and one soul, united in one holy bond of truth and peace, of faith and charity, and may with one mind and one mouth glorify thee through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So what you have in your hand is called the Book of Common Prayer. And please welcome, come on in and yeah, have a seat. Not at all, not at all. There's more chairs over here. Over those seats over there. Yeah. 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 The book that you have in your hand is called the Book of Common Prayer. And what I will do in this class is I will make comparisons. When I make comparisons, the comparison is not good and better and worse. Is that helpful? All right. I'm making comparisons to describe how an expression of Christianity is practiced in the Episcopal Church and may be somewhat different from how it's practiced either in other Protestant traditions or in the Roman Catholic tradition or the Orthodox tradition. So when I make those comparisons, if somehow my tone comes across as this is better than that, I am a human being. I might actually mean that, but just know that I don't believe that in my heart, if you will. I am what we call a lifelong member of the Episcopal Church. So I bring that with me. And I'm a great minority. How many of these people in this room are lifelong members of the Episcopal Church, right? A great minority of us, right? 30 years ago, most of the people would have raised their hands. So it's wonderful. It's a great joy. So this is going to be our guide for our whole class, the Book of Common Prayer. And the reason it's going to be the guide for our whole class is that the Book of Common Prayer has shaped the life of the Anglican Church and then the Episcopal Church in the United States of America. There's another word for you to note, Anglican. Anglican is a word that has a long history, but has settled down to signify those who belong to the Church of England and churches that take their heritage from the Church of England throughout the world. So an Anglican in the United Kingdom is someone who belongs to the Church of England. There are, as you can imagine, the United Kingdom being an empire at one point throughout the world, they did plant churches throughout the world who take their heritage from the Church of England and still have a special relationship with the Church of England. And those denominations throughout the world do call themselves Anglican churches. And the Episcopal Church in the United States is one of those. So I will use that phrase occasionally, Anglican. And all I mean by that phrase are those groupings of churches that take their heritage from the Church of England. It does not mean that the authorities currently today in the Church of England are overseers of all of these churches that they once planted throughout the world. So even though the Episcopal Church is an Anglican church, the Archbishop of Canterbury in the United Kingdom that has no authority in the Episcopal Church in the United States. So it's different than you might imagine. It's not the same thing as in a Roman Catholic tradition where the Bishop of Rome or the Pope appoints bishops in the United States. It's not the same thing. So the Book of Common Prayer is since the beginning of the Anglican Church in the Church of England in the 1500s. We will do the history later, but as you can imagine, the very first Christian worship services written in the English language came about when the Church of England was established. And the book that we have in front of us is a work that was put together to accomplish a task. And that task was to take out of monasteries all of Christian prayer from being secluded in monasteries. People would have to go to the monasteries and the cathedrals in order to pray. And because only the people who had collars on or were doctors of religion knew Latin, which is what all the worship services were in, the regular folks would come to worship, sit in the pews, and participate in worship to the extent that they observed it. So at the time that the Church of England was established, during the time of the Reformation, we'll go over some of this history, the attempt was to say, what are all the worship services that happen in a monastery that we can put in a book and give to the people so that they can worship, they can pray those services. They can know it, they can read it. Not that they really knew English, not that English was very well, not that the spelling was really established, but nevertheless, we want to give it to the people. So when the Church of England was established, the Archbishop at the time, Thomas Cranmer, went to all of the liturgical resources that were in the monasteries and put together a book for the people. And ever since then, almost any Anglican church throughout the world kind of has a book of common prayer that symbolizes so much. It symbolizes that all of the church's liturgy and worship is available to you. It's not my possession, which I may or may not give to you, right? As a clergy person, it's available to everyone. And it has been through history, both, it's a book of public worship and personal devotion. Now, in our modern age, it's having it be a book of personal devotion is getting very challenged because with technology and the age of information, there's a desire for more and more things to be in it. And it used to be about half this size. My grandmother would have one on her bedside. It just used to have a greater sense of personal devotion to it at one point. So this is the book that we will be working from and looking at as we go through this class. Before I go any further, but the way I like to start, and I neglected to ask Glenn to bring me a flip chart, so I'm just gonna take some notes here. At the bottom of my notepad, if I can find it out. Go. And I want you to tell me what you hope to learn more about in this class, or what questions do you have about the Episcopal Church, Trinity Church, anything that's just in your mind. Why do we stand when we do X? Why do we sit when we do Y? I see people doing Z. What does that mean? What questions do you have? Yeah, Mandy.
I'd like to know, I'd like to understand what is behind the procession church.
Excellent. What else? Yes.
I started off in the Lutheran Church, spent some time in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
I'm sort of settling here.
Yeah. Great.
With some spaces in between.
Okay.
Differences between it, rough differences.
We will get into that. Yeah, wonderful. What else? What else comes to mind? Yeah.
Hear a lot about high church, low church.
High church, low church. Wonderful. What else?
Since he brought up the Lutheran Church, we have a working arrangement with the Lutheran Church.
Yes,
Discuss that a
yes,
little bit.
I will do my best there. Yes. Yes.
The symbolism behind all the motions you make.
Symbolism.
You know, the meaning. So much of it I don't understand.
Behind what we call in priestcraft, the manual acts. All right.
That's what I'm
All right. Yeah, Penelope.
The creed as a political document.
The creed, all right. As a political document. Wonderful. What else? Catherine, I wish I could read it from here.
I can unmute and read
Yeah,
it.
great.
It's from Corey Mark. It says, we'd be interested to know why sometimes we use white wine and other times red.
Oh,
in communion."
absolutely. Yep. You'd
All
be,
right.
sorry, yeah.
I do have, fundamental question, the place of the, Episcopal Church, in the Protestant Reformation.
Right. We will do that. Annie.
Touched on this to start using this as a tool for our own.
Yeah.
evaluation.
Yeah, how to do that, where
How to
to,
make it more personal. I mean, I actually own a book,
yeah.
and haven't been a. It's been a while. It's
Yeah.
been 20 years.
Yeah.
So to reacquaint myself with it as a guide for my own.
Absolutely,
And then how to come to terms with some of the old language versus how to translate it from my own personal experience.
absolutely. Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, Lee.
I would like to learn more about the demographics of the Episcopal Church. And especially how it is responding to the increasing secularism in Western culture.
Okay,
Um,
wonderful. Wonderful. Sorry, you're behind me. Yeah,
Quick one.
Yeah.
To follow up on what you were doing, this could take a long time to answer.
Mount Pleasant, South Carolina has Christ Church Anglican
Right,
and Christ
Right.
Episcopal Church.
right.
So when you get to that,
Okay, all right. Someone else had their hand up over here. What else? Yeah,
The Common Cup.
okay,
What's behind all that, and I've been to a church in the past when I lived in Chapel Hill where they had non-alcoholic wine.
right,
Why did they choose to have alcoholic wine?
okay. All right, wonderful. What else? Yes,
I grew up Presbyterian and we didn't use dealers there, so maybe the importance can go into that a little bit.
kneeling, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. What else?
John, I would like to
Yeah,
first to explore the differences in Episcopal congregation from each other.
uh-huh.
We have a book of common prayer. How was that used differently
Uh-huh,
from one church to another?
excellent.
This is probably planned, but I'd be interested in a review and discussion of the very deliberate structure of the liturgy.
Okay,
Why we do certain things in a certain order at a certain time.
yep, excellent. I love that. Yeah,
The role of Mary in Anglican.
role of Mary in Anglican tradition. Excellent question. Very good question, yeah.
The Episcopal Church is more inclusive than other churches. One example would be how anybody can take communion versus other churches, you may or may not be able to, depending on your history with that church or if you've been accepted or whatever.
Okay,
And then also how people of different lifestyles can have roles in the clergy where in other churches, you know, if you're gay or whatever, you can't. And I'd like to know why Episcopals were like that and how that came about.
excellent.
I'd like to piggyback on that because mine was very similar as well. It was the process of how decisions are made when we are changing culturally in order to be more inclusive. The gay issue, the structural racism, just how are those decisions made?
Thank you. Wonderful. This is gonna be a great class.
We gotta cover all the next week.
We may need to go longer. That would be fine with me. Yeah, would be fine. What else comes up? Anything? Well, this is great, and I'm gonna, hopefully I'll get an opportunity to, I will print this out and have it for us, and we'll be able to keep it in front of us. So that by the time we get to the end of this class, I hope I will have helped bring some information and more clarity to some of these. And if not, you can say we haven't covered X and we can do that. So thank you. I do think that we will get to, in some way, in one way or another, get to most of these questions and considerations.
There's one more, Scott,
Hey.
from Patricia. It says, what are the main differences between Roman Catholic and Episcopalian?
Besides the Pope.
Besides the Pope, okay. We will get to that. Yeah, we will get to that. All right. Well, let's start by reiterating something that I already said, but if you turn to the title page of the Book of Common Prayer, you will see it says the Book of Common Prayer and administration of the sacraments and other rites and ceremonies of the church, together with the Psalter or Psalms of David, according to the use of the Episcopal Church. That phrase right there tells you something. It says that we understand these rites and administrations according to the use of the Episcopal Church. it's an acknowledgement that there are Christian worshiping communities that have that have a different way of worshiping. So right in the very cover of the book is an acknowledgement that this is according to our use, and an acknowledgement that there are others doing other things, right? So I think that's a very important piece for everyone to know about the Episcopal Church. The other thing is just for us clergy in the room, these books are published by the Church Pension Fund. So every time you buy one, I will take an order for them. All right. Let's turn the page. We're not going to be as menial as going through every page here, but just let's turn the page. And I just want us to look at the table of contents by title. And I want to just by that show you what I mean by Thomas Cranmer. There's a name you're going to want to remember. And I will have a flip chart next week so I can write some of this stuff down. But Thomas Cranmer, who was King Henry VIII's Archbishop at the time that the Anglican Church was created, did the very first Book of Common Prayer. It was his work, 1549. And what he did was take the liturgies of the Christian Church, and some of them, as I say, many of them were prayer services of monastic tradition. And he said to himself, how can I put together those liturgies that are accessible to everyone? And how not just accessible to everyone in their home, but how can they be in a parish church? How can they be led in a parish church? Because the Christian church before the Protestant Reformation really was centered around centers of learning, Christian learning, cathedrals, and monasteries throughout Europe and beyond. That's where Christian worship really was centered. Parish churches, as we understand them, were not the central life and energy, if you will, of Christian life and worship. Christian life and worship was centered in around the ordained, the bishop, who had clergy, who had cathedrals from which clergy went out to do preaching, but not necessarily create lots of different parish churches, right? In the way that we understand that in America. So he said, how could we have a book of worship that is available to everyone and can be accessed in parish churches and form worship in parish communities? So you'll see some of the early matter in the Book of Common Prayer. Its ratification and the preface and the services and the calendar year are all interesting to look at. But just the first section is called the Daily Office. So this section is intended to mimic the type of daily prayer that would happen in a monastery, available to everybody. Prayer in the morning, prayer at noon, prayer in the evening, and prayer before bedtime. So you have morning prayer, you have evening prayer, you have noonday prayer, you have evening prayer, and you have the service that's called Compline, which was the monastic service for prayer right before you went to bed. So in this book that you're holding, which was compiled in 1979, we all books of common prayer before this book, pretty much throughout the world. Maybe the Australians did something before 1979, but this is the other thing that's interesting to know, were written in Elizabethan language. Thee, thou, thus, thust, this is the first kind of way in which Christian worship was written in English. And it maintained itself in the United States, in the Episcopal Church in the United States, until this prayer book in 1979. So those who raise your hand that you grew up as Episcopalian, you remember what we call the old prayer book, which I remember as well and was raised on. And that's why it was thinner, because you'll see under daily office, we have a morning prayer service, rite 1. So all that signifies is Elizabethan language, thee and thou. Rite 2 signifies contemporary language, you and your. Those are the only differences. Well, they're not the only differences, but they're the major differences between these services. So before this book, there was only just one morning prayer service, one evening prayer service, one noonday prayer service, one conference service. So in that section, that's what you see. You see the kind of daily prayer that Thomas Cranmer wanted to take the monastic services of prayer, condense them somewhat, and say, what could your everyday Christian do for prayer? And that's what we have there. And this answers a little bit Annie's question about how would this be a book of personal devotion? And there's all types of ways that you could say morning prayer. You could do it whole cloth from beginning to end. And there's lots of spaces where it says you may do this next, you may read this lesson next. So it can be 20 minutes long, it can be 5 minutes long. It can, so there's a lot of ways to engage the worship in the Book of Common Prayer for personal use. So there is that section, and we will look a little bit more at that. The next titled section is just one service, and this is actually, we know this from history, the Great Litany is actually the very first service that Thomas Cranmer wrote in English. So the very first Christian worship service written in the English language is the Great Litany. We don't use it too much here at Trinity, but it's not uncommon that we may use it on the first Sunday in Lent. It is a service of prayer that was intended to be done in procession through the villages and communities. The bishop and or rector of the area would come out of the church and start processing through the towns and villages, and people were to come out of their house and join the procession through the towns and villages, often at agricultural times for prayers for good crops. And it's a series, when you really dig into its theology, you can see the beauty of it, but it is a series of ways in which we do not measure up to God and how we're looking for God to love us still and care for us still. And it has changed through the years. The language of it, or the actual prayers, have changed through the years. When it was first written, there was a prayer to save us from the detestable papacy and the Bishop of Rome and all of his ignorances, for example. That's no longer in there. All right, the next titled section is called Collects, traditional, which means Elizabethan language. And those are prayers for seasons of the year, holy days of the year, saints, and various occasions. A collect, I don't know too many other traditions that use that word. It's a title of saying a prayer to collect the thoughts of the day, the theme of the day, right? So in another Protestant tradition, it might just say in the bulletin, the prayer of the day, right? And the minister would stand up and extemporaneously pray a prayer that kind of included the themes of the day, whatever that might be. It might be the theme of the sermon that he wants to get to, or maybe it's Thanksgiving weekend, or maybe there's something else going on, right? So that would be the prayer of the day. In the Episcopal Church, that's called the collect of the day, right? So on this Sunday today is the feast of the baptism of Jesus. So we have a prayer for today that collects the thoughts of the day, right? And that's where you will find those prayers. And we have the same exact set of prayers in contemporary language. Okay, and please just raise your hand and ask questions along the way. The next titled section is called Liturgies for Special Days. Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and the Easter Vigil, if you will. A number of these are brand new with this prayer book, even though this is brand new, 1979, brand new. It's not really to be used with it, but nevertheless, because I'll get into this later, but the Episcopal Church is a Protestant church. It is a Protestant church, although there's a lot of unique aspects of the Episcopal Church that differentiate itself from other Protestant traditions, especially in the American context, So some of these liturgies are new to being in the prayer book, even though for years Episcopalians had Ash Wednesday. And there was readings appointed for Ash Wednesday. There was no special liturgy for Ash Wednesday until this Book of Common Prayer, because you can get different areas of the country are different. This is getting to a little bit to Gus's point, even in the Episcopal Church. So I grew up in an area of the country that was predominantly Roman Catholic, and Episcopalians wanted everybody to know they were not Roman Catholic, right? We don't do that type of thing, right? So we did have a service on Ash Wednesday, but you didn't want to say it too loudly, right? And we certainly didn't use ashes, right? So that's just a little bit of, you're getting a little bit of the development that's happened within the Episcopal Church over even the past 30 or 40 years. Okay, the service of baptism, and then our Eucharist services or communion services. Then the services that we call pastoral offices, confirmation, marriage, Thanksgiving for the birth of a child, which in the old prayer book was called the churching of women. So after a woman gave birth, they were supposed to come to the church for cleansing. So that's no longer in there. We took the best part of that idea, which was giving thanks for the birth of a child. And interestingly enough, we'll get into this later in detail, page 447, reconciliation of a penitent, or better known as confession. Yes, we do have confession in the Episcopal Church. It's not a requirement to take communion, as it is, at least in theory, in the Roman Catholic tradition. But we do have the sacrament or the sacramental rite of confession. Prayers for those who are dying, otherwise known as last rites, right? And then the services for the burial of the dead. Ordination services. And then there's an entire book of the Bible in the Book of Common Prayer, the Psalms, because the Psalms were a central part and are a central part of monastic worship life. And I will show you how in the Book of Common Prayer, there is a guide that helps you recite all of the Psalms in 30 days. And that was the intention of prayer. The Psalms are just this almost the center of worship life in monasticism. And they have maintained kind of a central place in Episcopal worship as well. And then we have prayers, which we just read out of when we started today. And let me just say this about that. We do believe in, you will hear me even, pray extemporaneously. And we also have prayers in the Book of Common Prayer that touch upon very universal human concerns. We all know what it's like to lose someone. We all know what it's like to be going in for surgery. We all know what it's like to have been married. We all know what it's like to have a child going off to school. You see what I'm getting at. We do have a little bit, maybe more recognition in our tradition to say, you don't have to think of the words from scratch all the time, right? Often we don't know what to say to God. It's okay to let somebody else help us, right? And so that's another way to see the Book of Common Prayer as a book of personal devotion, if you will, in your own prayer life. The idea that somehow you have to, in your own, get it all together and know how to do it. And in every moment, on every day, this is our guide, if you will, can be a guide for that. So the prayers that we just prayed from. And then page 845, let's turn to that.
We have to memorize that.
Absolutely. No, only you. We do have what is called a catechism. This is the last point I'm going to make. Well, maybe the last point I'm going to make, but I'm going to come back to it big time throughout the rest of the class. So just, this is a point to remember. Well, you don't have to remember because I'm going to bring it up every time we meet. We have a catechism, a teaching of the church. It's called, in contemporary language, an outline of the faith. So if you wanted to know what we might believe about the sacraments, for example, on page 857, you can go to that section. The first question is, what are the sacraments? The sacraments are an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace given by Christ as sure and certain means by which we receive grace. And then if you turn the page, you've got baptism and Eucharist and other sacramental rites and hope and all types of questions about faith. So we do have a catechism. We do have also, where am I? Page 864, 66. We have a section in this book called Historical Documents. On page 867, it's titled Articles of Religion. So in the United Kingdom, in the Church of England, the Articles of Religion, better known as the 39 Articles, were a confession of sorts for members of the Church of England. And if you were ordained into the Church of England as a priest, you had to sign off on these articles. And they go into real detail on all types of theological aspects of Christian life and things you might wonder and think about, from original sin and free will and all of these pieces. We have maintained them as part of our history, but the reason why it says historical documents is that they are not a requirement of participation in the life of the Episcopal Church. In other words, you don't have to sign off on these to be a member of the Episcopal Church. So that's an important piece to just know is there as well. So I usually do this on a sheet of paper. So I will do this. I will do this on a sheet of paper next time we meet. Yes.
The original Book of Common Prayer must have been a massive undertaking.
A massive undertaking, yes. The original Book of Common Prayer was a massive undertaking. There was one in 1549. There was one in 1552 when King Henry VIII died, and his son, Edward VI, came to the throne. He was a teenager, less than a teenager. I think he was 12 years old. And his family were rabid Protestants, and they thought the book that Thomas Cranmer compiled in 1549 was too Catholic. So they wrote a new one in 1552, and then it was all done away with when he died young, and his half-sister Mary came to the throne and converted the realm of England back to Roman Catholicism. And then when Elizabeth came to the throne, she died probably from ovarian cancer, very young, just a few years later. And her half-sister came to the throne, Elizabeth I, and brought back the Book of Common Prayer from 1552 and turned the realm back into a Protestant realm. And it's really Elizabeth that established the Church of England and Anglicanism as we know it today. And I will get into that. We will get into that history. But let me make this point about that, just to help here. Most people think that the Church of England came about because Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce, right? That's a major event in the life of England, of course. But Protestantism was a hotbed in England before Henry wanted to get a divorce. It was swirling around everywhere, and it was a major force in England before Henry wanted to get a divorce. So his marital, really his desire for an heir played into it, but that is not the only piece of that, if you will. Okay, here's an aspect. We've had a number of questions. How is the Episcopal Church different from the Roman Catholic tradition? How does it distinguish itself from other Christian traditions? And I want to just title this, if you will, kind of lay this out, and we'll keep on coming back to this aspect. There's one way to understand this. It's no way is perfect, but here's one way to understand. And one way to understand it is through sources of authority, if you will. How do different denominational structures work? And what tends to be their source of authority, if you will? So let's start with the Roman Catholic tradition, right? That's a pretty clear tradition in Christianity for sources of authority. You have the ordained individuals of the church that have a clear hierarchy of ordination, leading right up to the Bishop of Rome, who is the Pope, and his relationship with other ordained persons throughout the world who go out into the world, all from his ordination and consecration, go out into the world, and the structures of authority come back to that same source throughout the world. And in that tradition, those authorities are setting the theology and the practice of the church. And it is put into a catechism, right? That is the authority of the church. And it goes out to all members of the church as the authority of the church. It really does. I mean, we can talk about how individual Roman Catholics now partake in their tradition and in all different ways, but the authority and the way. So if you want to know what the Roman Catholic tradition believes about, I don't know, science or something like this, there is a question with an answer in the catechism. And that is the official response of the church. It's been discerned, not just by the Pope, but by a whole group of clergy and often academics, and prayed over. So I don't want to suggest that this is just out of thin air or something like this, but it is, you have a sort of clear source of authority and decision-making, right? And that type of system is often called a magisterial system, if you will. It's you know, it has a royalty to it almost, you know, like royal decree. It's decreed what the answer to this question might be, magisterial system. Then you have the Protestant world, right? And you have all types of traditions within Protestantism, but I'm going to stick mostly to what might be called mainline or American, main American understood denominational systems, from Baptist to Methodist to Lutheran to Presbyterian, some free church pieces. And among those traditions, there tends to be two major ways of authority. One would be called confessional, right? So this is very understandable in the Presbyterian tradition, for example, or in the Lutheran tradition. They have confessions that have been drawn up over time. And at least by theory, when you join those denominations, you are signing on to Luther's Small Catechism or the Westminster Confession in Presbyterianism that, you know, once again lays out what the church's beliefs are in all of these areas. And then the other tradition you have within Protestant main understood Protestantism in the United States would be what is self-referred to as biblical, right? So this would be more a Baptist tradition, right? Independent congregations going by the Bible. The Bible is our authority, and we could discuss that for a long time. But nevertheless, that is understood how authority, generally speaking, I'm speaking very generally here, is understood. Anglicanism is different. It's a little different within each branch of Anglicanism, but in the United States, we like one of the ways to understand the authority of where authority comes from in the Episcopal Church. And this is getting complicated as the years go on, but nevertheless, is that it's liturgical. In other words, if you want to know what we believe about baptism, pick up your Book of Common Prayer, read the baptismal service, and there you will learn what we believe about baptism. You want to know what we believe about communion and the Eucharist. Pick up your Book of Common Prayer, read the actual worship service, and there you will see what we believe about Eucharist and communion. One interesting tidbit is when the Episcopal Church made a decision that women could be ordained in the life of the church, what it required, the only thing that it required was a vote to italicize the personal pronoun in the ordination service so that it could be he or she. Now, all types of theological work was done around it, but the actual vote that made it possible was the vote to italicize the personal pronoun in the ordination service so that it could be he or she. And that's the type of energy that I want to, or perspective that one can hold on to as how the Anglican tradition, at least thus far, has a difference, if you will, or a distinction from some other Protestant traditions, and helps us also understand why the book continues to be central to our life and is in every pew, and in some ways encouraged to be in every home and on every bedside, if you will. Yeah, no.
So who voted? Who were the?
Yes,
was the
well, we will get
authority?
into how the Episcopal Church is ordered and organized and who gets to participate in those decision-making pieces, but all right. I wish I could stop and ask questions and answer some questions, but I need to go to church. But keep your questions and write them down and bring them next week. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.